So, hi everybody, and welcome to this edition of the TrueSec Tech Talk. My name is Hassan Ishkarti. I work at TrueSec as a security consultant. I've been doing that for the last 15 years, doing everything ranging from pen testing to incident response and helping the customers build their security. With me, I have two colleagues of mine.
Yes, I'm Fabio. I work a lot with incident response, forensic investigation, and threat intelligence. Been doing that for a few years. Background in red teaming, penetration testing, all kinds of security consultant work. Yeah.
And my name is Matthias Molén. I am new here at TrueSec. I am threat intelligence lead, and I have a 35-year background in Swedish intelligence.
Yeah. We are very proud of having Matthias with us today. And it is actually a very good opportunity and a very good reason to talk about some of the things that Matthias has specialized in the last few years, to say the least. So why are we here? What's happened?
Yes, so there is a pretty well known at this point, very huge campaign that has been going on for at least a few months, as far as we know. It's a cyber attack that is allegedly run by a nation state group that has been targeting a lot of different organizations and government agencies, potentially many different countries. The extent really is not known at this point. So what we know is that it started a few days ago when FireEye released information that they have been breached.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was shortly followed by statements and information about different US agencies, including the US Treasury, that have been breached in connection with a hack of Solarwinds, which is a popular, very commonly used software for monitoring of IT infrastructure equipment, which was, well, it turns out that it was the same vector and same campaign that also affected FireEye. And this really grew a lot.
Yeah, we hear, big names in the security business like FireEye. We have another big name in the monitoring and log collection business, the Solarwinds. So there must be a lot of efforts behind this, right?
Yeah. So basically, we're going to go through the technical details a bit later, but just to give the overview of the attack, which is really interesting, not only in general, but also from a purely technical perspective. This is a typical supply chain attack. So SolarWinds, which is a huge provider of software for monitoring, they were themselves breached somehow. It's not known yet how, but the threat actor managed to introduce a malicious update on their servers, which was then downloaded and delivered to potentially all of their customers. Again, we don't know the extent yet, but we can already see that now that we see infections. We have different infections we're investigating right now already after we've known about it.
They've mentioned in the media of up to 18,000 organizations being affected.
Yeah, and the way this was done, very sophisticated. They basically introduced a backdoor, not just adding files or adding a new package, but introducing a new plugin in the real application that was delivered as part of the update to their customers. And then it was deployed in a way that was dormant for a long time. And it was using all the components that were already built into the tool. So
that we start okay, I get the feeling this is big, this is huge. There has to be a project behind this. Some planning, maybe resources involved, and then you guys have been hearing about the APT group number this and number that, and all other type of fancy names that you keep hearing in the media, right? So we actually have an expert that had worked the last number of years within the Intel, right? Business or community?
Yeah, 35 years in the business, last 13 years doing cyber.
So what about if you give us a brief introduction into what these things are?
Yeah, so when we talk about advanced persistent threats, we're basically talking national intelligence agencies. APT is now a euphemism for hacking by intelligence agencies. And there are a few organized crime groups that of big big organized crime conglomerates that might now aspire almost arguably to the state of an APT, but mainly we're talking intelligence agencies. And as we saw from some of the targets in the Solarwinds hack, thereafter political and military targets primarily. Some of them are also after intellectual property, but again, mostly it is defense contractors and similar, that, stuff that has a national security implication. That said, some groups that work for the Chinese intelligence are known to actually steal other intellectual property as well, basically to cover for lack of proper national R&D in these things.
And so I think that's probably one of the main things that distinguish criminal groups from nation state groups, right? I mean, a typical nation state actor would steal data, probably.
Yes.
It would not disrupt or conduct ransomware. There are cases, right? I mean, there are some actors.
Yeah, there is. I mean, the most well-known actor is things like the Lazarus Group, which is essentially state-organized crime. They steal because North Korea is so poor, they need money more than they need data.
So basically, a lot of resources involved. This is what we say. But behind those APT groups, there are sort of a wealth nest. Let's express it that way. Somebody's providing them with those resources.
Yes.
You can take your time, do it the best way you can figure out. So it's a proper project management sort of.
It's very detailed. And they have well-funded, they can call on many government resources. And typically they are also known to make more indirect attacks. They can take the time to plan it out. I mean, this is one type of indirect attack we're talking about now. You make a supply chain attack and potentially get lots of targets into. Cloud hopper is another form of indirect attack, when you go for a service provider and then through the service provider's network start picking off important ones. There's a scale and there's a sophistication behind these attacks that are just, it needs government funding.
Yeah, now you're mentioning CloudHopper. We too were actually involved in some investigations related to CloudHopper. We were really amused, let's put it within quotes, about that particular operation. Now this, if I would rate this is elegant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking at the technical leaders on one end, and also the probably all the planning that's being behind it and all of that, it's really brilliant from an operational and technical
This
perspective.
is one of the most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated operation I've heard about.
Yeah, that is known, at least.
That is known.
But there are actually quite several similarities with the CloudHopper, and I really bring it up. That we investigated in 2016. It was 2016, I think. So these are attacks that end up compromising or having backdoors on a huge number of organizations. But eventually they're only after a few. They just want to have the reach to select their targets among a huge number of compromised organizations. So,
probably somebody can speak about deviation type of operations. They want to have the eyes and ears somewhere else, and then they can run their operations without being noticed.
Yeah, and then it's also both a service provider and, in this case, a supply chain attack. It's also really hard for the individual organization to protect against, because it's your trusted services. But again, what's we talked about before is intelligence agencies, they want to steal data. So a lot of their effort goes into how to exfiltrate large amounts of data undetected. They want to stay on target as long as possible. Fabio is going to talk later about some of the techniques they use to stay silent and stay hidden on their victims here, which is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And also, of course, because these are national security needs, the direct intelligence agencies, they tend to not vary too much. We know who our adversaries are and we stick to them. And that means that they keep coming back. That's why we call them advanced persistent threats. They keep coming back.
So, I mean, we talk a lot about sophistication level of threat actors, right? That's how we distinguish the capabilities that they have, and we use that to map to what type of defenses do we need to have to protect ourselves. Because we always say, like, I mean, it's very hard, or sometimes you can say it's impossible to defend against a certain level of attackers, but you can probably more easily defend against, I don't know, script kiddies or automated tools or some things in between, right? So you want to measure that so you understand where you need to be. And we talk about APTs a lot in nation state groups, but so, I mean, if we look at the scale that we normally use, we use a STIX framework that goes from like low to or none as a sophistication level all the way to expert and then strategic. I would probably put this all the way up to strategic, like as high as the scale goes. Really, if you look at everything that is actually behind this attack, that's quite impressive.
I mean, looking in that mirror, if we look just like back in time, historical wise, we see the deployment of that plugin, that DLL, the backdoor, call it whatever you want. That already occurred back in April, May, right? Judging by looking at the compilation timestamps and then the sort of signing timestamps, etc. So it goes all the way back there. So a minimum of good 4 to 5 months have been there for their operation in almost total silence. And nobody noticed much.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we don't know how they got detected. That information is not out yet. No. And maybe eventually FireEye or another organization will reveal that. But I think FireEye was at least the first that talked about the attack. I would say, probably have connections to other organizations and agencies as well. So it might not be directly them that had the initial
we don't know if
information.
FireEye themselves, or is one of their victims, one of their customers,
or one of their government clients. Who knows?
I mean, usually we relate the time from infection to detection because of the lack of monitoring and lack of visibility, right? That's most of the time is the case, but that's probably not the case when we talk about FireEye.
Right. I mean, you would assume that Fire has good detection capabilities in their environments and on their clients. I mean, that's part of the services they provide. So I would assume they have EDR monitoring and all of their, rules applied to them in a similar way that we do it, I guess, and other monitoring and threat hunting firms do. The question is, of course, like you can only, you never know what you don't know. Right. You put your rules on your tools and you trim them and you use your knowledge. But if it's something that no one has seen, and if they have enough time and they put enough effort, if it doesn't matter for them that it takes 2 years to get the information they want, it's going to be really hard to detect that. And just the fact that when they infect the system, when the backdoor runs on an infected SolarWinds system, it waits for a minimum of 12 days to do even the initial probes to then get additional information on what to do.
So that tells us a bit about the patience they have.
Exactly. So, I mean, 12
and then
days,
the time frame they are planning for.
I mean, a criminal group, even organized crime, they would never wait 12 days to move to the next stage. There would be no interest whatsoever to do that. No return of investment really in that time for them.
They just want their money as quick, as fast as possible.
So, I mean, just that only item there, it's a clear indication of a nation state actor.
Good.
Yeah.
So just mention also a little bit more about how state-sponsored hacking is really part of the intelligence toolbox that a government of a major nation can have. Like, they have intelligence requirements. They want to know things about their potential adversaries. They have signals intelligence, there is human spies, there is special forces, and there is the cyber component. And they can bring all these together, either separately or in conjunction onto each other. You can use the spy network to try and plant malware that will then beacon back to the cyber. You can use signals intelligence to try and harvest credentials and so on. So they can be part of a multi-vector attack against these high-value targets.
But we still don't know much about how the initial entry point looked like with the Solarwinds, right?
No.
Well, we know that, hey, all of a sudden there is a compiled component, digitally signed, legitimately digitally signed by Solarwinds certificate in their package. So it has been thrown into their process of like development, packaging, and deployment, right?
Yeah. So and then you start thinking, how hard was it to hack Solarwinds? I would, we have no insight in that, but I mean, if I were to just guess, probably hacking into Solarwinds would be easier to hack into most of their high-value targets. So and then we go into the areas of like your dependencies with lower security layers in your infrastructure and your organizations. And I think we can go back to this later too, but just to have that in mind, like the first step did not necessarily have to be so complicated from a technical perspective, but everything, I mean, the overall plan was very sophisticated and thought through.
So it could be as easy as like just a phishing attack,
I mean,
or a social engineering.
But if you are worried about these types of persistent attack, your security is not really stronger than the lowest security on your dependencies, or the vendor, the software you're using. Your trusted software.
Exactly, and then you start thinking like, what are all the parties that actually have direct or indirect access to my assets? Right. So I mean, a typical example is here, right? And I guess we can talk a bit more about the attack as well in terms of technical steps. But there are many dependencies between the cloud tenant of the victims and the on-prem infrastructure, and Solarwinds updates, which are developed by a third party, which is published through their site. So there are different components, and eventually your assets, your critical high-value targets will be dependent on perhaps a completely external system that you have no control of. Right. So having that mindset can really help, especially when you have proof that these things can hit very bad.
So, but before we dig a bit more into the details, just maybe a couple of words about these.
Just a couple of just to reinforce what I said. This is a list of well-known APTs. They have many names, and who is the alleged intelligence agency behind them. And you can see there is the Russian intelligence agencies, the Chinese intelligence agencies, the United States and Iran. Like, these are the major actors, but I would hazard to guess that most advanced countries have some form of capability one way or another here. And the APT-29 Cozy Bear, that is the Russian SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service. And we use these APT names in this business because it takes an intelligence agency to identify an intelligence agency. There's a lot of being published, mainly by the US FBI, who is now trying to indict some of the actors in these adversarial intelligence agencies to see if that can put a halt to their actions. And therefore, we know from them that it's the US intelligence agencies who say, who can do the actual identification. But even we can see that this seems right. I mean, the targets, what they're going for, what they're doing, it all matches the interests of the intelligence agency. And just to make a final point, for the vast majority, these are not hacker groups kind of loosely affiliated with an intelligence agency. These are intelligence officers working 9 to 5, a government job.
Yeah.
But, and again, APT 29, what can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, that's a slightly different story. I mean, we've seen these groups acting in many different occasions, not only state-sponsored activities, maybe primarily, or their tooling, or their the methodology they are using is actually copied by other groups, which reminds of their activities. So you can maybe mistakenly taken those activities as being carried out by APT 29 or something.
Yeah, and these groups, these intelligences, they're not above using readily off-the-shelf tools either.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of, we talked about it recently as well. There is a lot of, it's not as clear anymore what's a criminal group and what's a nation state if you just look at maybe a specific attack and what tools they use and what they left behind. In some cases, if we look at this particular attack, the Solarwinds hack, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, given the sophistication and all of that. But in other cases, I mean, just looking at the Eternal Blue exploits when initially they came out from the Shadow Brokers leak. I mean, those were NSA private tools exploiting single case, and suddenly the whole criminal community and actually everyone had it. And on the other direction, I mean, there is the whole cyber criminal business is growing so much. The whole ecosystem behind it. It's so vast. There are lots of interaction, and nation states also have interactions with criminal groups.
Yeah, and the criminal groups, they monitor what's happened. They also read about these things. So, I mean, if this is a very successful way of hacking, maybe the criminal groups will look at trying to elevate the same kind of problems.
Yeah.
But we will for sure see a monetization of this. I mean, people, other groups are trying to make benefits of this for sure. I mean, just look at the extent of the amount of entities that are affected by this breach.
Yeah.
We don't really for sure know, except if you were SolarWinds yourself, about how many customers are affected eventually. There has been figures published like 18,000, something like that, right? But nobody knows for sure how many instances are running on these customers and in what parts of the world, what parts of their organization, what are they doing, what kind of control do they have over like network devices, servers, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So the extent is really a bit fuzzy and unknown.
Yeah, and the thing is, once you identify one breached infrastructure or organization, that is only part of manual activities after the initial infection. And every attack is actually different from each other. The infrastructure they use is different. So you cannot get IOCs or indicators of compromise from one case and apply them to the other. They would probably not match. They have dedicated infrastructure, dedicated servers, IP addresses, domain names, techniques for each of those attacks, at least as far as we could see. So that makes it hard, and potentially, or most likely, we will not really ever know how many of those potentially 18,000 affected organizations were actually used in the next stage as well. So, I mean, the way it works is or it worked, we should say, that the backdoor was made part of an update, right? So you as a sysadmin or anyway SolarWinds responsible, you apply the update, and you're gonna get a package that is signed by SolarWinds, and it's hosted on their site. There is no added file inside that package. There is an added plugin to a function, which is part of a DLL that is legitimately signed by SolarWinds certificates.
So the classic controls we have or had at hand at that time will tell this is a legit file. Yes, you downloaded the update, you installed, you got a couple of new DLLs, but nothing strange with it. No, it's a trusted vendor, it's a trusted product with all means.
Yeah.
And then there we go.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, how many updates do we get in our infrastructure every day? How many new DLLs do we get?
How many times do we get told we have to keep our systems updated all the time?
Yeah.
Because otherwise we just invite other types of problems.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying you don't need to patch. You still need to patch.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, it's already hard to keep track of everything that is not signed and not trusted, let alone keeping track of everything that is trusted or that is digitally signed in the correct way that you are supposed to be able to trust, but you can't because the vendor is hacked.
Yeah. So I mean, if we go a little bit back in time, look at historical events, we have the Stuxnet, right? The components in the Stuxnet were partially similar to this. There were things signed by a stolen device driver signing certificates from somewhere.
Well, you can also say, I think the closest comparison I could think of is the NotPetya, this destructive attack that was directed at Ukraine, but kind of spread all over the world, in that they also hacked the maker of a tax program that was used in Ukraine to file taxes, and hit sent out a update, just like in this case.
Yeah.
And that update contained the malware.
So this thing landed on the system. It was installed as part of an update, and you already mentioned that it actually have a built-in. It goes dormant for a period of time, a number of days.
Yeah, exactly. For at least 12 to 14 days, it stays dormant, right? So it doesn't do anything. It's loaded as part of the installation, and it's loaded every time you run the system. But there's nothing happening for a period of time. And then what it does afterwards is that it makes a DNS request to a domain. The subdomain is actually automatically generated, but the domain is static. That is the strongest way we have to connect these dots together, maybe in a way, except the obvious update itself. But if you look at network-based indicators in different compromised organizations, then at least they would have this thing in common. They would poll, or they would make DNS request for a certain domain or top domain. Then again, it's DNS requests. They are not the type of requests that are the easiest to monitor either, because they will not directly connect to an external DNS server. So you wouldn't see a connection going from that system to the known bad system. The request will go through your internal DNS server, asking that to resolve that name, right? So it will be your internal DNS making the request out. And it's not so common that DNS requests are logged, at least not for long enough time to go back, because it's too much traffic. No one can keep track of it. If you start storing it, you're going to have terabytes of data in a short amount of time anyway. It's going to be possible to go through it probably, and quite useless, unless you get into this case, which is not, every day.
And the way it's constructed, those queries, or the thing it queries for, it didn't actually change a lot over time. So it was collecting information from the machine it's running on, and then doing some operations on it, and then doing the same persistent way of asking for this entry. Can you give me that one?
Yeah.
Which is quite different from when we look at automatically generated requests. They will vary over time. This one didn't really do that.
Right. So that's the first probe, and that probe is used to identify the actual command and control server that the system is supposed to talk with, and that is the part that is different per attack. Right. So I identify my agency or my target, and I say, okay, I want to go to the next stage with that one specifically. So next time that particular system talks to me, I'm going to give it the address of the next stage, which is going to be dedicated for that target. It's going to be a different IP, different domain, and so on.
So Fabio, what happens? I mean, we've been taught that, and we're telling our customers too, hey, keep an eye what things your systems are communicating to. Keep an eye if they do like outbound of your geo IP boundaries. If they start all of a sudden talking to another things in another continent or something like that. Is this the case with this thing?
That's another very interesting point, because most of the infrastructure they use was actually located in the same region or country as their target. So they specifically deploy virtual machines in cloud services that are located in the same country as their target. So you would see communication locally in that country.
So the triggers, oh, you're talking to an alien entity is not really hitting.
Not
that
really.
pattern doesn't match.
Not really.
No.
Exactly.
So once they receive the next channel or the next part of the puzzle.
Right. So then here's the part that is a little bit hard to track on a general level because every attack is going to be different. But we know that some of the communications they use, they leverage the existing legitimate Orion protocols. So they have a protocol, I think it's called Orion Improvement Protocol. I might get the name wrong, but it's a custom protocol on top of the functionality that is used, by the software to perform their operations in some way. So they're basically injecting their traffic into that protocol. I mean, the data is part of the real messages that are compliant to that protocol. So if you just look at it, even if you inspect the traffic, you will see it's the custom Orion protocol talking to, between that client and the server. You will not be able to figure out that there is something. I mean, eventually, now that you know, you can probably go in and find it. But you would not. I mean, it would not raise an alert.
No.
So talking about feeding off the land, this is not just using the tooling in there. This is also riding on top of the legit protocols. So you actually, when you look at it from different perspectives with different aspects, you see a legit thing going on.
Right.
There is not much deviation from what this product is used to do, right?
There is another remarkable item in this, is that parts of how they instruct their backdoor components to act on the next stage uses legitimate configuration files of the tool. So, for example, if you have, if the DLL component needs to decide whether taking the attack to the next stage or whether to proceed to make more requests, that decision is based on a value of a field inside the real configuration file. They took an existing value. There is like a retry count that is used for the system to pull their agents inside the environment. If that is 3, then you do something. If that is 4, you do something else. And they set the same configuration file to give the different components of their malware, or their malware. The whole ecosystem that they built on top of Orion. They leave instructions using built-in configuration files. So that is another really. It's another brilliant point, to be honest.
So once again, it's expected that the application will maintain control over their configuration files and change it.
They did not just take control of these companies, solar companies' network. They took apart that application just to figure out how can we use this? How can we inject our commands into this with as little fuss as possible.
Right. I mean, you can imagine how long time that takes, because we kind of do. I mean, we do that when we do our red teams. We do our red team engagements for our customers. And then we need to simulate, advanced criminal or advanced threat actors in general. And then we do that study. So that takes a long time. I mean, identifying, building custom communication channels on top of existing protocols, we've done that. It takes time. takes a long time, especially when it's custom protocols that are they're most likely not documented anywhere. It's internal or Solarwinds information. They need to reverse that first and then build the backdoor on top of it. So that's yeah.
So there is another component, very interesting one in this. That's it. This thing has a sort of a kill switch in it. Yeah. So when it gets certain responses back from the first DNS queries, then it gets a messaging that, hey, you should not act anymore. You should go dormant, go to sleep, don't do anything more.
Yeah.
Is that like a management thing, or
that is probably see their main objective is to remain hidden and not be detected. And the best way to do that is if you discover that this is, I pushed it out left, right, and center. These organizations, I'm not interested in these organizations. I don't want any more internet traffic than absolutely necessary. So instructing every DLL, every Trojan on a system that we're not interested in just decreases the traffic.
Yeah.
So this reminds us of like what we had another big that had that interesting kill switch, which was
which one are you talking about?
the WannaCry.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The WannaCry.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, looking at the list of networks, when you get a response belonging to any of these subnets, you should go like silent. Don't do the next step. That's a more of an extensive type of. We want to avoid this. Could that be part of a strategy to avoid detection if you run in a sandbox technology or some sophisticated advanced
exactly.
threat intelligence, something?
That's quite interesting. A typical sandbox system will redirect all their DNS requests and replace all those responses, right? So it will act as DNS and just send responses to internal addresses of the sandbox environment in most cases. So that behavior will actually just not go any further in the malware execution.
Yeah, so we're adding on top of the other efforts, they actually took the time to understand what the different sandboxing technologies does and does not, and then to avoid that, we got this kind of interesting kill switch feature.
Yeah. So it's a double win, right? You get the sandboxes to probably fail in many cases, and you got the possibility to decrease your footprint.
Yes.
And avoid detection.
And then once they get beyond that point, they know they can communicate to the C2 servers, or they got the instruction to start that phase. What happened then?
Yeah. So in addition to having all this, why is SolarWinds so interesting as an attack vector? And this is true for SolarWinds, like many other applications or platform we use. It's not just them, but first of all, obviously, as a delivery method for updates. But then the SolarWinds systems themselves, they are really central systems. They're quite critical from a technical perspective. They are a high technical target because on those systems, first of all, in many configurations, they already have access to other systems or equipment that they can use to go to the next stage. And second of all, it's the type of system that normally high privileged accounts will take care of, right? It's a very interesting tier. It's most likely should not be the same tier as domain controller, so to speak, or a certificate authority for that matter. But I would bet that in I'm gonna say numbers here, but probably 9 out of 10 cases you're gonna find the domain administrator administering a SolarWinds server.
Because it's easier to maintain access to all of these machines, pull off the logs, pull off the configurations, and do all of these kind of fancy things that you can do with that.
Yeah. So out of the box, just having your backdoor running in the SolarWinds context and just dumping the credentials or hijacking the sessions that are already existing on the system you landed on, then you probably in most cases you already have high enough privileges to move arbitrarily in the infrastructure. Right. So that's another point. Then you need to use those credentials. You need to use that access to move to your actual targets inside the environment, right? And that will, of course, vary depending on your target. It can be data. It can be, Fire has said they stole their red team tools. That might be it, or there might be more. We don't know. But obviously, things change depending on where they are, right?
Yeah.
And also the techniques they use, they also change. But they have one thing in common, at least for what is known. They don't just add their own tools and run their commands like you normally would. What they do is they replace the existing functionalities and components. For example, a scheduled task, a service, things like that. They replace them on their target system, and then they execute their commands through that, and then they replace back the original one.
So like stopping a legit service, changing the binary path or something, and then starting up, doing a job, and then reverting.
Yep, something like that. And same thing for scheduled tasks. Yeah. So it would be so much easier to just, because you obviously already have the privileges and the access to do everything you want in the system. You could just run your thing. But no, they do it this way. So it's, first of all, a lot harder to detect because you're going to have seemingly legitimate components running.
Legitimate services running.
And at the same time, since they remove it right after they're done, they clean after themselves very quickly. And if you put that into the perspective that this has been going on for months, I mean, it's going to be really hard to actually trace back all their activities.
All these different changes they've made to the system.
So some of these victims may never know what they've lost.
No, exactly, and that's the scary part, and it's also reality. I mean, and it's something we've been saying for years. It changed a little bit the last couple of years, and simply because we see so much ransomware. That, I mean, ransomware per definition is detectable because well, you're encrypted. It's hard not to notice.
It happened.
So the point of like not seeing what happened in your environment, that's been a bit less focused on, but not because it's less relevant. It's just because in most cases you would see ransomware, so you know something happened, then you go after it.
And they want you to know to pay. Basically.
But I mean, the point still stands. You need to be able to trace back. But it's again, for a typical criminal group or like a ransomware group, now they also steal a lot of data. They exfiltrate data. They do the double ransom thing. We talk a lot about that. And that's also something that if you just look for the ransomware, you may miss the fact that they also exfiltrated data. But that's also usually closer in time because they do it maybe a few days before the actual encryption. So you have a shorter time span to work with. Here we're talking about a nation state with the sophisticated techniques that we talked about now going over a period of several months. The chances are quite low to actually see something that is worth it.
Looking at these reports that have been published so far, both the FireEye and the Microsoft report about this, we see the next stage or the forthcoming stages in the attack continues into something really different than a classic attack. They focus on high privileges, just regular ways. But then in this case, they actually did a successful lateral movement from on-prem services towards cloud services. And that was very intelligently done. So they basically targeted the federation services, the authentication, the identity providers in that organization, and then hooked up into that to make the jump from the on-prem to the cloud, and then manage to master the cloud services, become the admin over that part of the space. Right. And then not only stopping there, but then adding other trusts on top of the existing ones to master other applications and other services that were trusting these services.
And exactly. They were forging their own tokens, right? Using the high priv, they were forging several tokens.
And then you're also back to what I was talking initially also about one of their major tasks that they have is to find a way to stealthily exfiltrate stolen data. And if you own the cloud, what better way to move data out of the organization?
Yeah, exactly. But this is very well connected to the discussion of the dependencies we were having before, right? And that's a typical example. Obviously, the cloud infrastructure was dependent on the on-prem infrastructure, which was compromised earlier. The on-prem infrastructure was dependent on all their admins, and their admins were exposed on SolarWinds.
Yeah.
SolarWinds was obviously dependent on the updates deployed by the vendor, and the vendor is dependent on whatever dependency they have. So this whole chain is...
We don't even know technically if SolarWinds is where it started, or someone started somewhere else and moved into SolarWinds.
Yes. And I mean, we can give a million examples about dependencies. We've been talking for years about the dependencies, including this one, but a special focus on how you should not expose your administrative privileges to arbitrary systems in your environment. That's typical. It's a typical insecure way to manage systems. You RDP with the domain admin to a server, you leave your keys everywhere, and then the first threat actor that happened to be there on the server can get that, and suddenly they're domain admin.
And then you have a continuous space from the on-prem to the cloud, so you're synchronizing those important admin accounts. So if you own them on-prem, then you're owning them on cloud as well. That's another piece. There is no disconnection in between. So the dependency just carries on from one system to another one, doesn't matter the type or the shape of it.
Yeah, and even though it's really, really complex to do this inventory, this understanding and mapping out all the dependencies for real in a good way, it's really hard to do it right. But it's still really, really important that every organization does it as much as they can. At least the low-hanging fruits. I mean, you probably have your production servers that are running applications that are maintained by external consultants that maybe store credentials to your production servers in their networks, and you have no control about how they manage them, how they handle them. That's just one example. You have vendors integrating their applications and getting access to your systems. We live in a very complex world. But starting with having this dependency map, written down, documented, and followed up, I think it's really important. And this is just an example of why. Yeah,
and obviously, I mean, this represents the top tier of the kind of adversaries that are out there, and for a lot of companies out there who are worried, they're not the target of, so they are not sitting on stuff that is valuable on a national security level that would warrant them to fear this particular super sophisticated attack after them. But it's good to look at it and see, even if this is, benchmark yourself against this, how much can you improve your knowing that these types of dependencies exist, at least knowing where you're vulnerable and see what can you do to improve it.
And we go back to the different sophistication levels, right? Can you withstand this type of actor? Probably not, in most cases. Can you withstand a criminal group that is trying to leverage vendors into going to other systems? Maybe, depending on their sophistication level. So you need to put yourself in a position of what do you want to defend against, and then work with that. Because it's easy, or it's easy to fall into the thought of, okay, but we stand no chance about these actors anyways. Well, that might be true for these really high-level groups, but there are not that many of them, and they don't have that many targets either. You need to worry about all the others, which are a lot more common and a lot easier to defend against. Not easy, but easier.
Yeah, I know. You want to think, if a not so skilled copycat think this is a great idea, I want to try it, but use it to use such an access to deploy ransomware instead, and they do it this kind of same thing but sloppier. Can you then detect it?
Exactly.
This whole thing actually reminds me of back in the days, there was a post in a news group that says, what if somebody creates a very successful application, and then what if somebody after a while change what that successful application does into something more evil. Now, we're not blaming SolarWinds in any ways, but this is basically it. Somebody is taking a successful application that they know exists in their targets, environments and
Yeah,
then
purpose.
using that. Exactly. So what can we say about the strategies to get healing for this, within quotes, to get this fixed? I mean, a lot of our customers, a lot of organizations are looking and scratching their heads, and what should we do now? How should we proceed? There is a patch delivered by SolarWinds. Obviously, the patch takes away or deletes that.
Yeah, not in all cases.
Yeah, exactly. So how should we think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, identify if you had a vulnerable version is step number one. The versions are, sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head right now.
It's up to the 2020.2 in the 2020 line, and then 2019.4 HF5 or something. Yeah.
I mean, everything is.
Everyone's
talking about it.
It's public,
and we don't have it here.
No.
But that's step number one. And then conduct an actual investigation if you have been breached. There are IOCs or indicators of compromise that have been published. For example, the hash of the malicious DLLs, or if you have visibility in your DNS request and any type of network traffic to identify the known bad attacker infrastructure. Like I said before, that's not a foolproof approach because those things change based on their target. So at the end of the day, it's always going to be a question of risk. If you think the chances are very low that they went next stage with you and you want to take that risk, then you take that risk. But I would certainly do an investigation no matter what. Now, the extent of that investigation may vary depending on different factors, the risk that you want to take and the resources and capabilities and the possibility to get external help as well.
But I mean, there is one idea or one reflection on this, is that the attackers or whomever did this, they must have their hand full with dealing with all these systems that were like knocking the door.
Right? Potentially 18,000 something systems, right?
So I guess they have some kind of prioritization type of thing. We're out going after these type of organization. Let's postpone the other guys. Right? Would that give us like a false sense of security? Or can we rely on that?
Well, do you want to live with that? That's the question. Are you fine living with that? It depends. Some might, some might not. So
you may or may not have a backdoor on your system.
Yeah, and
they're probably not going to use it. Can you live with probably?
Yeah, exactly.
And go back to your actual question, like what are you supposed to do? You identify that, then of course you want to make sure it's patched and you want to disconnect it from the network if it's not patched immediately. I would also recommend strongly to not turn it off. That's the typical thing that is not done properly when we start forensic investigation, that the systems are turned off, which means we lose the memory, we lose the RAM, the volatile memory, which contains a lot of interesting information. So if you know you have an infected or affected system, just disconnect the network. Don't turn it off. And if it's a virtual machine, you can take a snapshot of the entire machine and you can keep that as a reference for forensic. And at the same time, you can start rebuilding and patching and rebuilding your system. Probably install from scratch, it's even better. That would be the general approach. Then every case is a little bit different. It's hard to give. It's hard to give an advice for everyone, but those are the main steps.
So yes, patching definitely yes, and then our standpoint here is that make your mind about further investigation. That depends on your risk appetite. If you want to go with having that risk or dealing with it, taking care of it or not. Right. So any investigation at any level, just so you get to the point that you can deal with it.
Exactly.
Okay. Do we believe that we're going to see like variants of these things popping up soon enough?
Well, variants in terms of the same threat actor, I doubt it. At least, variants. Okay, what do you mean by variants? So
this is a threat actor who is known to reinvent itself every time it's caught.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that they change the infrastructure for everyone of their targeting the same campaign, I would assume they will not reuse, at least not very much of what. Some of the components that have been analyzed as part of this, the malicious code, it has no reference whatsoever to any known malware been analyzed before. So this was built particularly for this. So I would assume that the next campaign, they probably already have it's running, I guess. They probably have completely different malware. But like Matthias was saying before, I mean, you may see copycats, you may see groups that are trying to do similar things.
Yeah, is this something that is going to give fuel to those who always state don't apply the most recent patch, wait a period of time until somebody else get hit?
Well, the problem is in this case, you said wait 5 months.
Yeah.
How many are you willing to live with the known vulnerabilities in the system?
Let's put it this way. Talking just about Windows now because it's common. When Microsoft releases the patches, it takes them just a few hours from when the patches are released until an exploit vulnerability is available.
Yeah.
Right? So after a few hours after the patch, you have threat actors that are in the wild running attack tools, exploiting the vulnerabilities that you may have not patched yet in those few hours. Those are the criminal groups. Those are the ones that make up the 90% of the breaches you can see. Do you want to defend against the 90%, or do you want to defend against the whatever percent that may be left? So I think that answers the question. So is it preferable to have patched right away? Yes, definitely.
And then we're probably not going to stop seeing these kind of well-organized, well-financed, well-supported type of attacks. This might be an eye-opener for many, but this is definitely not the end of it.
No, I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest hacks in history.
Yes, no doubt.
I mean, and we're all
this is the new benchmark for a really sophisticated attack.
Yeah, used to be Stuxnet. Now we're going to talk about Solarwinds. Okay, and again, I mean, we don't know that much yet. There are probably a lot more things will come up later.
Okay.
All right.
We just had actually one question. Somebody dares to send a question, which we like. What other software systems does targeted organization use? ?
Well, that will vary for sure. Whatever is. So, I mean, you can start thinking about how would you select such a system to attack? Well, first of all, your targets need to use it. It needs to be done in a way that you can use it for your purposes. So, for example, using their protocols, jump on top of those and stuff. They need to be hackable in the first place, right, as a vendor, to be able to deliver that. And what are their delivery methods, and how does their build and development process look like? Like, how easy is it to inject your malicious code into their processes? That's another side of the story that we haven't talked about. We have teams with us working on this all their time, working with app security and all that stuff, which really probably could have saved SolarWinds for being able to be affected this way. If that part of their process was too hard to hack, or if it was going to be easier on some other vendor, maybe that other vendor would be chosen instead. So it's going to be hard.
It's going to be.
I mean, I can give you one example of software that has been used not to deliver malware, at least for inside a breached organization already, that we've seen in multiple occasions that threat actors use Lansweeper to use or to run inventory jobs inside the environment, inside the breached environment. So first they take access to that system. Either they have full access to the environment already and they use the Lansweeper system to just run an inventory, or they use it to gain further access. In one case, that was used for getting an inventory of all the servers that did not have antivirus. So you get that report, and then you feed that list to the tool that you're using, and it's going to install a backdoor on all the systems without AV. That's one way to use it. Another way to use it is to push updates, to push things like the script that runs before the ransomware to like disable all the protections, delete all the backups and all that stuff, and then to push the actual ransomware. That's usually done in multiple ways.
So the AVAM software will not react on them because that's another legit product.
Yeah, exactly.
They will not block it. They will not like disable it.
Yeah, and we've seen it both use it when it's already installed in the environment, and both installing it themselves when it wasn't there, which is obviously a lot more noisy. But
but really, it's finding the sweet spot. I mean, I don't think it would be possible to do this type of attack against like Office just because Microsoft is too well protected. I think, but at the same time, you want it to be widespread. It's like this Solarwinds was.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, it's really hard because one of the things we don't know at all yet is how a Solarwinds attack.
How did they get there?
How did they get there?
Yeah.
Was it just that they were sloppy and hadn't protected themselves and didn't realize what that could mean? Or was it something else?
Yeah, and is SolarWinds the only one?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did they put all their bets on one vendor? They maybe have different leads, and this is the one that paid out.
Yeah.
Or maybe there is another one that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have another question here. Could an earlier hashing of the SolarWinds software updates have stopped this attack if the software was hashed directly after the development, before the injection of the malicious code, and somehow communicated to the customer's system for automatic verification? Could this attack have been stopped earlier?
But how do you get those notifications? How do you get that information in the first place?
Yeah.
If you hijack that part of the process first, then you're back to square one.
Well, I guess as a direct answer to this, part of this is actually the reason SolarWinds uses digital signing on these files, right? Just to prove the origin of them.
Yeah.
So this is something that has been not just injected in the final stage of the delivery of the software.
The problem is that it looks like in this case the attacker has had such complete control of SolarWinds network that they can do all the authentication process themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like they got access to the web server hosting their updates and they replaced an update. They actually have full control of at least all the parts that signs their updates. So I would assume they had control to pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So which means you can make it more complex for sure. And there are probably ways to make this a lot harder for them to achieve. But again, if you have full control of the vendor, that's going to be hard. I mean, you can inject in the actual source code before it's compiled.
Basically, we look at these DLL files, we look at all of the involved components. They are perfectly digitally signed by SolarWinds. Nothing wrong with that part at all.
No.
And that's actually the way you detect it now when we know about it. So we know the signer certificate, thumbprint, and serial number, and so on. So we actually can establish a positive proof that, hey, you're running a malicious version of this thing.
At least the version that is signed with the same certificate that was used to sign malicious versions.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. It seems that we don't have any more questions. So we hope we could shed some more light on this matter. I guess we will see more details coming our way.
Yes,
and
for sure.
the nearest weeks, days, etc. And we will for sure have a reason to go back to this particular event or this activity, and then maybe use it even more to like tell people and light organizations why it is very important to start thinking of protecting the different processes and the different pipelines you have within your organization. There has to be a protective measure within your organization, not only one.
No.
You need to know your boundaries. You need to know where to stop, using certain specific admin credential, using certain specific system. This is the boundary for that system.
Know your dependencies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And put it together the right way. Otherwise, if we don't have that control, how would we ever be able to monitor what's going wrong?
Yeah.
That's another challenge. We have, I mean, FireEye certainly did have monitoring.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we're standing here discussing that part, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Great. The session is recorded, so it's going to be available to watch later again.
Yes.
Great. So thanks for attending.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good time.